Welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Talk. Our speaker today is our head teacher, our guiding teacher, Dokai Georgesen, who started practicing with Dainin Katagiri Roshi in 1974, was ordained in 1984, and transmitted in 1989. He's resided here since 2003 and is currently president of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. So with no more ado, take it away, Dokai. I'm not hearing you, Dokai, because you're muted.
Okay, how about now? Is this good?
Excellent.
Okay. Well, in the past, I believe 8 weeks, there's been a class taking place led by GD Laura Kennedy on the instructions for the cook. And I have found that text by Dogen to be very inspirational for me in many ways. So I thought I would go through it again. Some of you took the class, I think, and so that's where I'm going to start, and we'll see if I can continue, but I'll just start with it and see what happens. I think it has relevance to all aspect of our spiritual practice. So it was written when Dogen was 37 years old in the year 1237. And I'll start reading from the beginning. From ancient times, in communities practicing the Buddha way, there have been 6 officers established to oversee the affairs of the community. The monks holding each of these offices are disciples of the Buddha, and they all carry out the activities of the Buddha through their respective offices. Among these offices is the Tenzo, who carries out the responsibility of preparing the community's meals. So, from ancient times and continuing in today in communities practicing the Buddha way, that's Hokyoji as well. We call ourselves a Hokyoji practice community. And while in the past, Dogen is referring that all of the people in that community were monks. That's not the case here at Hokyoji, but still we're a community. So there's been 6 officers. A little later, we'll go into what those 6 officers are. But the point is, there's been some people delegated to take care of the affairs of the temple or of the community, working together with each other to make it a harmonious situation. And all of these people are disciples of the Buddha and carry out the activities of the Buddha through their respective offices. So this activities I'd like to talk about a little bit. In our meal chant that we say when we're doing formal meals here at Hokyoji, and also in all of the Soto Zen traditions that I'm aware of, we recite 10 names of the Buddha, and what's particularly moving to me is these 3 of them. One's called Manjusri Bodhisattva, great wisdom. One's called Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, great compassion. And there's one between them called Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, great activity. And I think there's something important to note about that. Manjusri is great compassion, or great wisdom. Avalokiteshvara is great compassion. Manjusri is great wisdom, and Avalokiteshvara is great compassion. So this is always two sides of what we practice. We practice being very compassionate and also with compassionate wisdom. Means we need both sides of those things to actually act appropriately. And that's the middle one, Samantabhadra, great activity. And it always, every time I recite this, it comes back to me. Yes, we have great wisdom, great compassion, but they don't do anything, or they're not worth anything unless we can act based on the understanding of those things, those two very important things, which are the two pillars. So let's say the three pillars: compassion, wisdom, and activity of what we do. Without any one of those, our practice is not going to prosper. And so in this writing, Dogen says, among these officers is the Tenzo, the cook, who carries out the responsibility of preparing the community's meals. So this next 16 pages that he writes is just about the responsibility of the cook primarily. And he goes into a lot of detail, but I think this detail it's very concrete, and I don't find it boring, at least not anymore. I might have a long, long time ago. But it's bringing out, really examining the details of how the cook prepares food for the community. It is written in I'm only going to say this once. It's a Chinese word, Shanyuan Jingyui. And that's the only time I'm going to try to say that word, because I'm sure it's not, I'm not pronouncing it accurately. However, in Japanese, it's called Zenen Shingi, which is more pronounceable. And what it actually means in English is regulations for running a monastery. And that word is going to come up several times, and all I'm going to refer to it as is the regulations thus forward. So it is written in the regulations that the function of the Tenzo is to manage meals for the community. This work has always been carried out by teachers settled in the way and by others who have aroused the bodhisattva spirit within themselves. Such a practice requires exhausting all your energies. If a person entrusted with this work lacks such a spirit, then they will only endure unnecessary hardship and suffering that will have no value in the pursuit of the way. I think I first read this this teaching maybe in my late 20s, and I think I had started to work at as the cook at the Minnesota Zen Center. And this paragraph really I examined closely, and I thought, do I have this kind of spirit that I can do this work without just enduring unnecessary hardship and suffering? Because the Tenzo job is very challenging. Not only that, but it will have no value if I just suffer endlessly. And so that was always a question for me. And it's a question even these days too, because I still, at least once a year, at least I try once a year to put myself in the position of the Tenzo here at Hokyoji, cooking for the community. It's Rohatsu Sesshin. And I get very tired um, sometimes. And we had a discussion last week about, well, how do we balance that out? And I want to go back to this sentence that such a practice requires exhausting all your energies. And there's a footnote to that, and I'd like to read it. In the original, the expression bendo is used. This is a note by the translator, who's in this case is Thomas Wright. I'm using the book called Refining Your Life. And he says, the character Ben has two possible nuances, one meaning to discriminate or discern, and the other is to make an effort or to exert one's energies. And he goes on, he says, though Dogen probably means to imply both, in this particular case, the latter meaning is being stressed. Now that's the his interpretation, but I'm not sure that's I might have a rebuttal to Mr. Wright on that point. I think both are equally important. It requires exhausting all your energies, but not to the point where we're not discerning what's actually appropriate for us. And as you might know, even though we're talking about the cook, we're talking about everything here, everything, every job you might have somewhere or someplace, maybe not in a monastery at all or in a Zen practice community, any place or whatever your responsibilities might be. I think there's this balance we have to find all of the time. And so I suggest both are important, discernment and also just trying to use all of our available energy to do whatever job or task we have. Yeah. And the regulations also say, put your awakened mind to work, making a constant effort to serve meals full of variety that are appropriate to the need and the occasion, and that will enable everyone to practice with their bodies and minds with the least hindrance. So this there's a footnote too, to put your awakened mind, which I find interesting. Uchiyama Roshi defines this modern idiom as having the mind or attitude that seeks to manifest here and now and in every moment the highest or most refined life of the capital self, capital S self. Let's think about that. Stop for a minute and examine that. For one thing, looking at the footnote, let's say to manifest here and now in every moment the highest or most refined life of the capital self. So the refinement in this case doesn't mean refinement like the best upholstery we can have on a couch or the best, most refined living in terms of a material aspect of things. It means a refinement that of how refined means very close to this moment. And it's to do the most refined of the capital self. Now, the capital self is different from the small self. The small self is concerned about, our individual, our real, just kind of momentary needs or wants, desires that aren't connected with the rest of the world. But the capital self is the self that recognizes there is this self, even though in Buddhism we have this saying that there is no self. Still, there is a body and a brain, organs that are called dokai, existing in this temporary condition that has to work and recognize what it needs to do. And it needs that big self is not seen as some self that is different from any other self in this entire universe. And that's not always so easy to see, but that's what we have to work at. I was just reading also today, this morning, about the Genjo Koan. Dogen says, if your enlightenment is small, you think it's okay. I'm paraphrasing. He says it a little more elegantly. But if awakening fills your whole body and mind, you realize something is missing. Now, it goes against our normal understanding of things. I think he says something like, if the Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you think it's sufficient. If it does fill your body and mind, you feel something's missing. It kind of goes against our logical understanding of how we think things should be. We would think if it fills our whole body and mind, it's sufficient. But Dogen's emphasizing, if we think our awakening is sufficient, it's not true awakening. And if it fills our body and mind, then we're in very close contact with every moment that's arising. And we're also in very close contact with the very moment that delusion arises. And that's quite often, if we examine ourselves closely. So yes, he says appropriate to the need and occasion, full of variety, that is appropriate to the need and occasion. And this word appropriate comes up very often. We've studied quite frequently the koan where the monk, some senior monk, well-established, wise monk, approaches his teacher when he's near the end of his life and asks him, what is the teaching of an entire lifetime? And the teacher says, to make an appropriate response. That seems pretty plain. But that's the beauty, I think, of Zen. It comes down to plainness. And if we examine that closely, of just making appropriate response under all occasions, isn't that like something miraculous that we could do? Think how often we don't make appropriate responses based on all kinds of conditions. Either we were afraid or we were angry or arrogant or whatever. The appropriate response is how we actually empathize and connect with other people and things. So appropriate to the need and occasion. He also says full of variety. Now, there was a resident here by the name of Hoko Carnegas. She's now the abbess of Sanshin. She lived here for 3 years. And she wrote this, well, she collected a bunch of writings about being the Tenzo. I mean, the book, it was just, paper bounded together, but it was like an inch thick about the details. And I didn't read the whole thing, but one of the details was variety. Include the 6 colors, in the meal, have each the colors, red, blue, yellow, green, purple, and what would be the other one? Well, so orange. So it's like, man, talking about making it kind of rough. Now you got it. So there's all kinds of there's no end to this practice. And there's a practical value for that. It's like, well, then the meal looks, it looks attractive. It has colors to it. Not only that, but colors, the way I understand it, represent different vitamins and nutrients for your body. So yeah, that was not where I was at when I started cooking for the community. It was basically oatmeal and cottage cheese in the morning and maybe some nuts. So 2 colors out of the 6. But anyway, okay. Down through the ages, many great teachers and ancestors, such as Guishan and Dongshan, have served as Tenzo. Guishan, I can't tell you a story about, but Dongshan is very, very important in our lineage, and that his name will come up later. And he was actually the founder of our Soto Zen practice in China. And he was a Tenzo. Although the work is just that of preparing meals, it is in spirit different from that of an ordinary cook or kitchen helper. So it's not the same as just working in a restaurant and getting paid. Okay, we thoroughly study the regulations concerning the overall work of the Tenzo, and moreover, listen closely to what those who have done this work have to tell us regarding the details. So I find this regarding the details interesting. I have an architect friend who said to me once, and I don't know that I've ever heard this before until he told me it. It was many years ago, but he said, God is in the details. And I've been thinking, that's kind of a little koan for me. It's stuck with me for 20 years. Just what does that mean? God is in the details. And of course, being an architect, he might have a kind of a certain slant on what that means. But but something came to mind, something comes to mind about this. Again, it's not details in like it just being so extremely refined that we know it's it's not expensive. Let's put it that way. But and the story that comes to mind about this is when I read Dark Night of the Soul by Saint John of the Cross. And he all he did in his first mission was found an abandoned church, way out in the countryside, and no value, more or less, and no one owned it or anything like that. And he had a companion or a follower, and the follower said, "What are we going to do with this?" Kind of, broken down building. And I think I've seen this quote before, but he just said, "We'll start with the cornerstone." In other words, this is the foundation of where we're going to build something from. And, over some amount, quite a bit of time, they built something. And then the most moving part of that for me was that there's somewhere in the book or commentary or something, someone came and visited his church after it had been renovated, and that they noticed how everything had its place. Every little thing had a place for this, a place for that. It was clean and neat and organized. And yet they had no money. But that sense of just taking care of your physical environment to the best way that you can was what was so moving to this person. And I have to say, well, that's what we practice doing here at Hokyoji, just taking care of the place. First machine we bought that was expensive was a mower. So we could mow the lawn, because you might think that's strange, but you gotta keep the weeds under control, the lawn first. I mean, to me, it's I never figured these things out until they actually happen, but that's what you need. Well, I'm gonna stop and we'll see what comes up, if I've said anything that will elicit discussion. I had the idea of going a little further, actually quite a bit further, but um, but I feel like maybe I'll stop here. For the one thing, when I was trying to look at the next place to stop, it didn't really seem like it was a good stopping place, but this actually does seem right. So I'm just gonna put it out for questions. I have talked for, if I just keep talking, there I talked for 30 minutes. Just went to 10 o'clock. So I've done my duty. And that's that's the prescribed amount of time I'm supposed to talk for. And then I invoke or invite questions and discussion. So has that brought up anything for anybody, what I've said in these past 30 minutes? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, hi. So I've never read the instructions for the cook. I've had different things quoted out of it, but um, you're when you were talking about uh, discernment and energy, and which the one guy saying it seemed like Dogen was emphasizing more energy, and you thought it was maybe more 50-50, and I could picture the 50-50. The don't be don't waste effort, put in your full effort. That's always a Zen kind of theme. The discernment, when I think of cooking in the kitchen, would be the current modern phrase, work smart, not hard, which is like the opposite of work hard. You also want to work smart, not hard. And I'm just going to guess, not having read it though, but since there's so much detail, that there's probably things and instructions for the cook that are about working smart. And I don't know if any of those come to mind for you off the top of your head.
Oh, yeah, well, he actually goes into a lot of detail about that I think is smart. I mean, I haven't gotten there yet. I only covered a half of a page, and this thing is 16 pages long. So at that rate, I could go on for another couple years of my Dharma talks about this. But yeah, I think everything else is about the detail of just how you actually work in the kitchen and kind of be smart about it. No, one thing I didn't get to, I think it's actually in the next paragraph, but in the days that Dogen was practicing, they didn't have a supper, so it was just the breakfast and the noon meal. And for me, when I'm working as the Tenzo, if I do breakfast and lunch, that feels like a full day. Then we also Hokyoji with a tea treat and a supper, and usually. So I'm examining that as a change in our the way we do things. Anyway, I didn't say much about that, Tim, but any detail, but I don't know. Is there something more in more detail you wanted to ask about?
No, I mean, like I said, I just have never actually read instructions for the cook, even though it's like super famous, you know. So, but
Well, if you come back in a couple of weeks, I'm speaking again, so I'll get into more of the details.
thank you.
As long as I decide to keep talking on this. So. Yes, Mary?
Thank you, Dokai. As usual, really great Dharma talk and really a lot of food for thought. I do have a question, being that I have cooked for large groups, nothing that compares to what Hokyoji does that I've experienced on the side of eating. I'm just continually amazed, and was amazed, for example, at Rohatsu last year, what you were able to do in the kitchen. And obviously you've had a lot of experience, but it was really amazing to me. I'm just going to say delicious and amazing. But my question is, as a cook for groups of people that come to my house, is the planning. That for me is always a challenge. You have 25 people coming to Thanksgiving, a bunch of kids who don't really eat anything but mac and cheese, and and fortunately, I don't usually cook for people with a lot of gluten intolerance, dairy intolerance, but I have, allergies, all of that. So I was just wondering if Dogen or you had any comments on the planning, too much food, too little food, waste. Those are really, those are difficult parts of being a cook.
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree. I even as often as I've done this, I have my kind of set menus. It's still the planning part is grueling. I mean, to work out how much to buy of this, and if there's at our retreats, maybe it's 12, 15, 18 people, something like that. Well, how much of this do I need? Planning it out. And it doesn't work to look on the can and say there's 4 servings of this, it doesn't work out the same for our eating. And if I'm going to overbuy, I really don't want it to be the things that are going to spoil rapidly. But anyway, the main point, and what came up for me too, as you say, too much or too little. I had a great teacher. It was a Tomoe Katagiri, who I followed being the Tenzo after her at the Minnesota Zen Center. And she said something very interesting to me, and I've said this to a lot of you, especially when working in the kitchen, is she taught me something very interesting, kind of counterintuitive, but I found out very, very true. She said, to cook too much food is greedy. And I thought, what? Because there's this consciousness that when the cook is, we don't want to run out of food. People think I didn't cook enough for them, and but that's all connected with yourself. Like, I don't want to be thought of as not as a person who didn't provide enough food for the community. So for me, it was over and over and again. I'll use the thing oatmeal. I'm cooking oatmeal. I'm looking in the pot, and even though I've measured it out to what I think is good for the community, what we have enough, I'll look in the pot and say, "That's not enough. It's not enough." So I keep adding another cup in and water, and all of a sudden I have just as much as I added in was extravagant, more than we needed, if not even more so. So I really learned from that to cook too much is greedy. It's about you. It's coming back to you, and you're greed to feel like I haven't provided enough food. That's greedy. So really, to strive to find that place where there's no leftovers that's really wonderful. Unless you're actually planning to make more and use the leftovers for another meal in a different way. About leftovers, actually that same architect that I was talking about, it's when we were using the residence that I live in right now as the kitchen, and we had a pretty big session and leftovers all over the place. They filled up the whole refrigerator. And he happened to be visiting me, and we had to go through the leftovers and pull them out and compost them, and put them in the compost and wash the dishes. And this person, we were looking at him and said, "These really don't look very appetizing." And then I made a rule. After that, I said, leftovers either go home with people, in the community, or they get eaten right now, or they go to the compost right now. Don't leave them for me. And I examined that, and I also think when a cook does that, they're not thinking of the whole picture. If they leave leftovers with the idea that the community can really enjoy these leftovers, that's not really true. they just don't want to take care of it. And they don't admit that they cook too much stuff. So I believe that's what's behind that. Anyway, that's kind of a, maybe I went off on a tangent according to your question, but that's what it came up for me. So anything else you have to add, Mary? Yes, Tenzo Rushin.
No, I don't know how many times it was just a wonderful thing because you're the guiding teacher and who gets served last, and how many times you managed to finish off something so we didn't have leftovers. That was just a wonderful feeling when there was just enough that you would take it upon yourself to eat a little bit more to finish off and have no left.
Yeah, that's true. Fortunately, we have Bo around here, so.
I know it's a little bit different now that Bo's around, right? So
yeah. Anyway,
there is an art to folding in leftovers into other meals, which is part of the whole details of what's going on in the kitchen, is trying to fold leftovers and make use of the leftovers for the next day. But I think there's a rule in one of the books somewhere about something shouldn't be reused more than once or something like that, and then you have to compost it. So there's a lot of little details, and it does. I think my Tenzo days are over because I don't have that kind of energy, but there is kind of an obsession, and it's easy to get lost in that kind of obsession of working out the menus and working out what you have too much of and what you have too little of, and how you're going to readapt the menu as a longer sesshin goes on. So, and it's a very difficult balance. And working with other Tenzos, I've learned so much. Like Dan from Clouds, just basically, he would get the evening meal and he would just go to bed. And I thought, well, this is how he's conserving his energy. He's just forget the rest of the schedule, because this is the one time the Tenzo could go and sit if they were dedicated to staying in the kitchen all day. But he just went to his tent and went to bed. And I think Clouds has a rule now that the kitchen is closed at 7:30, and then the Tenzo can either attend to the schedule or go rest, but they're not allowed to stay in the kitchen past 7:30 at night. So this is to kind of teach people to have some kind of balance.
thank you. This question came up with Katagiri Roshi, and I think he said, after 3 times, I think we should, or when it starts all turning grayish and brownish, it's time to let go of the leftovers. But also another person told me, all you need is lots and lots of shredded cheese. You just throw it into a casserole, you put a lot of cheese on top, and you're okay. So anyway, but so there's a moderation in everything. But I follow Dan's example. After starting at 5:30 in the morning and going till 7:30 at night, I'm pretty much done for. The idea of going and sitting zazen in the zendo, all it would happen is I would just fall over. So anyway, that's my reflection. Tim, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, but Laura has her hand up too, and I've already spoken, so I could go after her.
Or
Thanks,
Yeah.
Tim.
okay, yeah, Laura, why don't you go?
Okay. I had the privilege of living in Tassajara for 3 months, a little over 3 months. And there were a few occasions where there wasn't enough food. And while greed isn't good, lack isn't good either. And I found it really interesting how there were some people who would pay attention to whether or not there was enough food for everyone, and some people who didn't care and they wanted to rush to get their bit and however much they wanted. So just observing that was interesting.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Oftentimes, we serve, the during a formal oryoki meal, we serve the food in a pot. And so when you're working together as a community, it's if you're first, being served first, you kind of look in the pot, and if there's just a little bit, you have to gauge yourself, even if you're hungry, if it looks really good, it's good practice to just think, well, we want to have enough for everybody, so you just take a little bit. So that's refined practice, what I'll call it. But yeah, it's not, I would say it's not good if it's lacking, if you're actually continuously lacking food. Thank you for your comment, Laura.
Tim, I'm going to go in front of you because I haven't said anything
I'm
yet.
sorry.
Uh,
Oh, okay.
I just told Tim that I was going to displace him,
Oh, okay.
at least temporarily. I want to say two things. One is, I think you have to be really courageous when it comes to leftovers. You have to be really kind of fearless about how you go about. um, you're going to have to, I think, throw out your ideas about food and because great things come out of experimentation. And I think even when they don't work out so well, because I don't think there's a Tenzo on the planet that hasn't had a problem with something not coming out right, then you have to be fearless about kind of standing firm in your own courage about it. And the other thing I wanted to say is, from time to time, I think when I'm being Tenzo, my mother used to do this 3 times a day forever. It was just a mom's job to do that every day. And now that I've been living in monastic environments where I don't have to do everything in the household that I would if I was on my own, it makes me particularly grateful, I guess. It's good. It's a gratitude kind of reflection to realize what kind of dedication and stamina that involved. And that's all I'll say. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been sitting here, I keep coming up with more things. I actually wrote them down so I wouldn't forget, because people are saying things that are sparking stuff. But first, to talk on to what was just said about being fearless with leftovers. Teresa and I used to do tent camping lots. Actually, we used to do cabin camping, and she'd cook over the fire, and she's a really good cook. And my favorite meal is almost always the last day, where she would take all the leftovers and put them all together, almost without exception. Maybe there'd be something she wouldn't toss in because it wouldn't go, but it'd be everything. It was delicious. Even things, combinations you wouldn't think. So fearless, yeah, go for it with leftovers. And then to follow up on something Laura talked about, when the food is getting short, Zuika Redding from Cedar Rapids always talked about that as part of our practice as people eating the meal, that you pay attention to how much is left, and it's your responsibility to be awake and aware and to adjust your portion sizes if you see something's getting kind of low. So, and as always is with practice, sometimes you may forget to pay attention, or you might even be in a greedy mood. As you know, Laura pointed out, some people seem to be kind of their mode at that moment. But still, good practice to pay attention to what's left. But the first thing I thought of was I remembered an ancient personal story of my own. That the first time I was at Hokyoji, they had me helping out in the kitchen, and I found out later it was a couple Tenzos that were a little bit newer. But there was a lot of stress in the kitchen about the meal being late. Too much stress. But it is practice. You don't want the meal to be late. It's important. It's always a big emphasis on it. But it was such a contrast from where I was coming from, the Iowa City Zen Center, that might have, a one-day sesshin, and there might be 6 people there, and one person would be the Tenzo, and he wouldn't have an assistant. And I'm not saying this was the correct way to do things, but the meal was always late. Whether it was 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Occasionally, if it was getting past 15, 20 minutes, someone would go down and see if the cook needed some help. And we would just do extra zazen. And it just seemed normal to me. And no one was upset or stressed about it. And no one died, so it's just interesting perspective that it gave me, that of course it's part of the Tenzo's practice to not be late with the meal. And it cuts into people's break time when you're late with the meal. And if you're doing a 7-day retreat, break time is really important. But it did give me the perspective of it's also not that big a deal if it's late. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
We're coming down to the wire, so please
All right.
speak up and share whatever you might have to offer.
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes left. So, yes, Kim.
I found it interesting that the architect said that God was in the details, as in contrast to the common statement of the devil being in the details. Wondering if he had any comments on that.
Well, I think it's just all related to what Tim just said in a different way. It's like, well, we tried to be on time. That's a detail, and really it's a big detail in Zen practice. I mean, we try to follow quite a strict schedule, and if we're late in one thing, it's going to throw something else off, like people's rest time, and you don't want to mess with that. And but if that detail becomes so obsessed with it, then I think that's where the devil comes out. Just we lose our equanimity, around, okay, we're late, how do we deal with this? And so so I think it's two sides of the same coin there, and it's just finding that balance, Kim. The devil, both sides are true. Mm-hmm.
Right, and it struck me that there's a relationship. The devil's there if you're focused on product, and that this is the product that I need, and maybe God's there if you're interested in the process, and you delve into it and find the beauty in that process itself.
That makes sense.
Perfect timing. Thank you, everybody. So, first of all, in the chat box is the means for our continuing survival and Flourishment, which is a link to a place to offer dana if you would like to do that. Secondly, thank you, Dokai, for your talk. Obviously, it's a beloved subject for all of us. And so we'll look forward to the unfolding of the other things that you have to say. Let's see. Next, let me talk a little bit about the future. One is next week. Our Sunday speaker will be Reverend Myo-o Habermas. And we also were in the middle of a 1 week group. That's first time to be in here, but in the next part of May, we'll have Naturally Awake, that's led by Mark and involves sound baths, among other things, which are very popular. And then Reverend GD and I will be sharing the leadership of the True Heart Women's Retreat. And finally, in the last part of May, we'll have our Just Sitting group, where the only rules are keep quiet and nobody can tell anybody else what to do. It's a very popular retreat, actually. A lot of people enjoy it as a different way of meditating and enjoying Hokyoji. So having said that, I don't think I'm missing anything. Let's do our closing vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Have a good week, and we'll look forward to seeing you back again next Sunday.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Laura. Bye, Mary.